The signal had been sent in silence, a soft cry from a distant world that was running out of time. For centuries, the alien civilization had struggled against disasters they could not control. Their crops had failed year after year, their skies had grown darker, and their oceans had turned against them. Entire cities had been abandoned because they could no longer provide food or safety for the people who once thrived there. Hope had become a rare thing, carried only in the stories told to children at night, when elders spoke of a brighter age that had long faded away. In their desperation, the leaders of the alien council gathered together. Their bodies were fragile, their movements slow, for hunger and fear had drained them. They knew their people could not last much longer. They had searched for solutions within their own world, but every effort failed. That was when they turned their eyes to the stars. Perhaps somewhere out there another race existed, one stronger, wiser, and kinder, who might hear them. With all their remaining strength, they poured their resources into a single machine, a transmitter capable of sending a message farther than they had ever dreamed possible. The message was simple. It carried no demands, no conditions, only a plea. "We are dying, please help us." The aliens did not know who would hear it. Perhaps no one would. Perhaps it would be lost forever in the endless night of space. Yet they sent it anyway, for hope was better than silence. The signal left their world carrying across the stars, slipping past dust clouds and frozen rocks, racing toward distant suns where life might dwell. The people gathered in open fields to watch the transmitter fire. Its beam into the sky, many wept. Some prayed. Others simply held each other because they did not know if this was the last act of their civilization. Days passed, then weeks, months turned into years. At first, the aliens listened every hour for an answer. Their scientists waited by their machines, ears pressed to static, eyes wide with hope. But no reply came. Doubt crept in, heavy and suffocating. Some began to whisper that the universe was empty, that they had cried into a void that would never speak back. Others clung to faith, insisting that time in the cosmos did not flow as it did for them. Perhaps, they said, it simply took longer. Perhaps their saviors were on the way, traveling across impossible distances. Children grew up hearing two different stories. One was filled with despair, that the stars were cold and lifeless, that no one would come. The other was filled with wonder that great beings of light would arrive, carrying gifts of knowledge and salvation. In the minds of the young, those beings became almost mythical. They imagined creatures tall and shining with wings of energy and voices like music. They dreamed of soft hands healing wounds, of gentle wisdom teaching them to rebuild what had been lost. Time continued to pass, and the council wondered if they had made a mistake. They worried their message had been too weak, or that it had reached the wrong kind of beings, those who might come not to help, but to conquer. Still, what choice had they? Their world was too broken, their people too weak. If help came, it would be welcomed. If danger came, they had no strength left to resist. Then one night everything changed. A young technician, weary from his long hours, noticed a faint pattern in the static. At first he thought it was nothing but noise. But the rhythm was too precise, the signal too clear. He called for others, and soon the whole chamber filled with scientists and leaders staring at the flickering lights on their screens. The signal was faint, but it was there. Someone had heard them. Someone was answering. When the news spread, the city awoke with a new kind of energy. People who had grown tired of waiting suddenly felt their hearts race with excitement. Families rushed outside to look at the sky, though they could see nothing yet. The stars seemed brighter that night, as if they themselves were listening. For the first time in decades, laughter echoed in the streets. Songs were sung, fires were lit, and the idea of a future returned to the people's minds. The council immediately began preparing for what was to come. They polished their meeting halls, built banners of welcome, and wrote speeches of gratitude. They wanted to show their visitors respect and honor. They wanted to greet them not as beggars, but as friends. The children were told to behave, to be kind. For soon the luminous beings from the stars would walk among them. Days turned into sleepless nights as telescopes scanned the heavens, Finally, one morning, the watchers on the sky towers saw something. It was small at first, a faint glimmer against the black, but it grew larger with every passing day, until there was no doubt. Ships were coming. Enormous ships, faster and stronger than anything the aliens had ever imagined. They cut through the sky like falling stars, leaving trails of light behind them. The people gathered in the open plains, waiting, trembling, hoping. The ships slowed, their massive forms casting shadows across the land. The ground shook as they descended, engines roaring like thunder. The aliens shielded their eyes, overwhelmed by the sound and size. This was no gentle arrival. This was power made real, a force that could crush mountains if it chose. Yet still, the people whispered prayers of gratitude. Help had come. Salvation was near. They waited with hearts pounding, imagining the glowing beings stepping out, radiant and kind, ready to embrace them. They believed they were about to meet angels, or something close to it. None of them knew yet who truly walked inside those steel vessels. None of them had guessed that what stepped forward would not be beings of light, but something far more unexpected. The news of the approaching ship spread across the alien world like fire in a dry field. No one could think of anything else. From the youngest child to the oldest elder, all minds turned to the same thought. Their rescuers were coming. After so many years of despair, the people felt alive again. Markets filled with voices, storytellers spoke to eager crowds, and artists began carving images of the visitors they had not yet seen. The council worked endlessly. They wanted to be ready, not only with food and shelter but with honor. They believed that the ones answering their call would be beings of great grace. They imagined gentle hands, soft features, and wise eyes. These beings, they thought, must have lived in peace for countless ages, for only those who understood peace could hear a cry for help and respond with kindness. Every day the people rehearsed. Children practiced lining up in rows, holding flowers that would be offered to their guests. Musicians tuned their fragile instruments, preparing songs of welcome. Priests wrote long prayers of thanks, believing their visitors might understand the language of devotion even if they did not understand words. The leaders prepared a speech that spoke of friendship and unity, hoping to show that they were worthy of help. In the schools, teachers told the children stories of what was to come. They spoke of tall, slender figures wrapped in flowing robes, glowing faintly with the light of the stars. They imagined these beings walking softly, their voices like calm rivers, their steps light upon the ground. The children listened with wide eyes, drawing pictures of shining creatures who would bring peace and safety. Some even dreamed at night of being lifted into the air by hands of light, carried to places where hunger and fear no longer existed. Among the people, the anticipation grew so strong that even their hardships began to feel lighter. Hunger, no longer seemed as sharp, and sickness no longer seemed as heavy, for they believed help was almost here. Families fixed broken roofs, painted their homes, and cleaned their streets. They wanted the visitors to see beauty, not ruin. They wanted to be remembered as a people of dignity, even in their weakness. In the great council hall, long debates filled the air. How should they greet the visitors? Should they kneel to show respect, or should they stand tall to show strength? Should they speak first or wait in silence until spoken to? Some argued that silence was better, for surely beings of such wisdom would guide the meeting. Others said words of welcome must come first, for gratitude should never wait. In the end, they decided to prepare both. Silence in case it was needed, words in case it was wanted. The skies above their world became the center of all eyes. Towers with telescopes were manned day and night, never resting, never blinking, as they watched the approaching fleet. Each day the ships grew larger, shining like silver against the endless black. The people measured their progress with excitement, counting the days until landing. At night, fires burned across the plains as families gathered together to talk of what was coming. Parents told their children, "Remember this moment, for it will be the day our world changes." Elders whispered to each other that the long curse of suffering would finally end. The air itself seemed to vibrate with hope, as though the very planet shared the anticipation of its people. The children played games in which some pretended to be visitors, while others played the role of grateful hosts. They bowed and offered imaginary gifts while the visitors nodded with grace and handed out invisible treasures. Laughter filled the fields, and for once it was not bitter or tired, but pure. The sound of it carried through the night air like a promise. As the days passed, the council prepared gifts for their guests. They gathered the most beautiful gems dug from the mountains, polished until they gleamed. They created golden cups filled with sweet waters from their last pure springs. They even brought together scrolls written with the oldest wisdom of their people, believing the visitors might value knowledge as much as kindness. These gifts were placed in the Hall of Welcome, a large chamber filled with banners, music stands, and places for feasting. The hall had not seen such light in generations, but now it glowed with fresh fire, waiting for the guests. Despite all the joy, fear still lingered in hidden corners. Some whispered at night, "What if they are not kind? What if we have invited conquerors instead of saviors?" But these whispers were quickly drowned out by the louder voice of hope. Most believed that no race capable of crossing such vast distances would waste time with cruelty. They thought only great wisdom and peace could allow such power. And so the whispers faded. Hope shone brighter. Finally, the day arrived when the ships could be seen without telescopes. Children pointed at the sky with trembling hands. The ships were enormous dark shapes moving slowly against the stars. They blocked out the light of constellations, turning the night sky into a canvas of shadow and fire. The ground trembled as the engines roared, a sound so loud that even the strongest covered their ears. The people had expected silence, or perhaps music, but instead the visitors announced their arrival with thunder. Still, no one complained. "They are powerful," the people said to each other. "Power must sound like this." The council gathered at the edge of the plains, dressed in ceremonial robes, carrying their gifts, ready with their speeches. Behind them stood rows of families, children holding flowers, musicians with their instruments, priests with their scrolls. The entire world seemed to stand still, waiting for the moment when the visitors would step onto their soil. Hearts raced. Breath caught in throats. This was the moment they had dreamed of, the moment they had painted in their minds with colors of light and beauty. The ships lowered slowly, steam hissing, metal groaning. The people prepared themselves to see shining beings descend, glowing and gentle, smiling with soft eyes. But as the doors of the ships began to open and shadows moved within, the people did not yet know that what was about to emerge would not match their dreams at all. The visitors were not beings of light. They were something very different, something no one had imagined. The air grew heavy as the massive doors of the ships began to open. The sound was deep and metallic, echoing across the plains like the growl of some great beast awakening after a long sleep. Steam poured out from the sides, covering the ground, in white mist. The aliens leaned forward, their fragile bodies trembling with anticipation. For generations, they had imagined what kind of beings would answer their desperate cry. In their hearts, they still clung to the picture of glowing figures stepping out with grace and kindness. Children squeezed the hands of their parents, waiting for the first glimpse. Shapes moved inside the ships. At first they were only dark outlines, but soon the figures stepped into the light. The crowd gasped. These were not beings of light at all. They did not float with wings or shine like stars. Instead, they walked heavily on strong legs, tall and solid, their forms covered in strange coverings that looked both like armor and clothing. Their faces were unlike anything the aliens had imagined. Firm, scarred, filled with expression, eyes sharp and alert. Some carried long objects slung across their backs or held tools that looked both useful and dangerous. They were humans. The aliens had never seen such creatures before. To them, the humans looked fierce, almost frightening. Their skin bore the marks of sun and battle. Their movements carried confidence, and their voices, when they spoke to one another, were loud and rough compared to the soft tones of the alien people. The aliens whispered among themselves in confusion and fear. These were not angels. These were not gentle beings from some peaceful paradise. These were something else entirely. The council leaders, though shaken, stepped forward as they had practiced. They bowed deeply, offering gifts of gems and golden cups. The humans paused, exchanging glances as if unsure what to do. One of them removed the covering from his head, revealing hair damp with sweat and a face lined with both age and strength. He gave a nod, a simple gesture, but it carried a strange power. Then, slowly, the humans lowered their weapons and extended their hands. It was not the graceful bow the aliens had expected. It was rough, awkward, but it was a greeting nonetheless. The council leaders hesitated. Then one of them placed his trembling hand into the human's larger one. The touch was warm, strong, and real. A silence fell over the crowd, broken only by the sound of the human's machine still cooling behind them. Fear mixed with curiosity. The children hid behind their parents, peeking out with wide eyes. Some of the elders whispered in worry, believing perhaps they had made a mistake. But others looked deeper. They saw how the humans stood firm on the harsh soil without flinching, how they breathed the air that made the aliens cough, how they looked at the broken land not with despair but with determination. These were not fragile beings. These were survivors. The humans began to move among the people, their eyes scanning everything. They studied the buildings, the land, the skies. Some knelt down to examine the soil, running it through their hands. Others checked the fragile instruments the aliens had built, their faces thoughtful. They spoke to each other in a language full of sharp sounds, and though the aliens did not understand the words, they recognized the tone. Practical, decisive, alive with action. Soon, devices were brought out by the humans. Strange machines unfolded from their packs, glowing with lights and humming with power. One was placed on the ground, and to the amazement of the aliens, it began cleaning the poisoned air around it, sending out fresh oxygen that felt easier to breathe. Another device analyzed the soil, producing quick results on a small screen. The humans grunted, nodded, and then began pointing, giving signs that showed they had plans. The council realized slowly that though these beings did not look like angels, they had come prepared to help. Not with glowing hands and soft songs, but with tools, strength, and knowledge built from survival. The people watched in awe as the humans moved fearlessly, unbothered by the dangerous insects that crawled near or the rough winds that blew across the plains. Where the aliens saw obstacles, the humans saw challenges. Where the aliens saw despair, the humans saw work to be done. Still, fear lingered. The aliens whispered the word quietly among themselves. Deathworlders. They had heard legends from traveling traders long ago about planets so cruel, so unforgiving, that only the strongest life could survive there. Worlds filled with storms, predators, and endless struggle. Those who lived on such worlds were said to be ruthless, shaped by constant battle. The aliens now believed the humans must have come from such a place. Their very presence carried the weight of struggle overcome. And yet, despite their frightening appearance, the humans smiled. They laughed among themselves, their voices carrying like thunder but filled with warmth. One human noticed a child peeking from behind her mother's legs. He knelt down, pulling out a small packet, and handed the child a bar of food wrapped in shiny paper. The child hesitated, then tasted it, her eyes widening in delight. Laughter erupted from the humans at her expression, and soon, cautious smiles appeared among the aliens as well. The first walls of fear began to fall. The humans set up camps quickly, as though they had done this many times before. They built shelters not only for themselves but also for the aliens, stronger and safer than the fragile huts the people had used. They shared food from their supplies, strange but nourishing. They treated the sick with medicine that worked faster than anything the aliens had known. Day by day, the aliens' view began to shift. The humans were not the shining beings of legend, but perhaps they were something even more valuable. They were strong because their own world had forced them to be. They were skilled because they had faced hardship again and again. And now, Instead of conquering or ignoring, they had chosen to bring that strength here, to share it. At night, the aliens lay awake, thinking of what they had seen. The humans laughed loudly, worked tirelessly, and faced dangers without hesitation. It was strange, even frightening, but it was also inspiring. Perhaps salvation did not always arrive with light and song. Perhaps sometimes it arrived in the form of those who had walked through fire and learned not just to survive, but to thrive. The people realized they had not called angels. They had called humans. And though the humans looked like Deathworlders, they had stepped forward not to destroy, but to help. The future, once dark and hopeless, now seemed filled with a different kind of light. Not soft and gentle, but fierce, unyielding, and alive. The first days after the humans arrived were filled with confusion. The aliens did not know how to feel. Their hearts told them to be grateful, but their eyes showed them being so different from anything they had imagined. The humans were loud, their footsteps heavy, their voices carrying far across the plains. They laughed with ease, but their laughter sounded almost like thunder. They worked quickly, with hands that seemed rough and strong, and they faced problems without hesitation. To the fragile aliens, it was both impressive and frightening. The council held many meetings in secret. Some leaders whispered that the humans were too dangerous. "Look at them," one said. "They carry tools that can cut through stone as if it were cloth. They eat food that we cannot even touch. They breathe our air as though it were pure when we can hardly survive in it. Are such creatures safe?" Others shook their heads. "They have shared food. They have treated our sick. They have built us shelters stronger than we could ever make. Does that sound like an enemy?" The arguments went on through the nights, but outside the halls, life was already changing. The humans set up machines that cleaned the air and purified water. Streams once poisoned became clear. Children ran to drink from them, laughing as the cool water touched their lips. Families who had long suffered from hunger received packets of human food. The taste was strange, sometimes too strong, but it filled their stomachs in ways they had forgotten. Slowly, the aliens felt strength returning to their thin bodies. Still, unease lingered. The aliens were quiet and careful by nature, used to speaking in gentle tones and moving with grace. The humans were the opposite. They shouted instructions to each other while building structures, their voices echoing across the land. They moved, quickly carrying heavy materials with ease. To the aliens it seemed almost chaotic, yet the humans always finished what they started. At first, the aliens kept their distance, watching with wide eyes from behind doors and fences. One day, a storm swept across the plains. Dark clouds rolled over the land, and fierce winds tore at the fragile houses of the aliens. Families huddled together, fearing the storm would destroy what little they had left. But the humans did not run. They stood in the wind, securing roofs, tying down shelters and guiding families into safe places. Some of them even laughed as the rain soaked their clothing, calling out to each other with cheerful words. When the storm finally passed, much of the alien village still stood, protected by the humans' efforts. That night, around the fires, whispers began to change. "They are not afraid of storms," one alien said in awe. "They are not afraid of anything," another replied. Fear slowly gave way to respect. The children were the first to show open curiosity. Where their parents stayed cautious, the young ones crept closer to watch the humans work. They followed them through the fields, giggling when a human noticed, and gave them a friendly wave. Soon the children began playing near the human camp, and to everyone's surprise, the humans joined in. They showed the children simple games, teaching them to toss a ball back and forth, to run and laugh without fear. The sound of alien and human laughter mingled together, softer this time, less like thunder and more like harmony. The parents watched, hesitant, but their hearts softened at the sight. If the humans could be gentle with their children, perhaps they were not as frightening as they first appeared. Over time, the aliens began to speak more with the visitors. At first, it was only gestures, smiles, and nods, but then the humans, introduced small devices that translated words. The alien people listened in wonder as their own language flowed from the strange machines, making communication possible. For the first time, they heard the humans' true voices speaking words they could understand. "We came because you called," one human said through the translator. "We do not come to rule you. We come to stand with you." The council was moved by those words, though still cautious. They asked why the humans had chosen to answer when so many other civilizations had ignored the signal. The humans gave a simple reply: "Because we know what it means to struggle. We know what it means to fight for survival, and we could not turn away." Those words spread across the villages. The people whispered them to each other, repeated them to their children. The idea sank deep into their hearts. The humans understood struggle. Perhaps that was why they were so strong. Still, not everyone was convinced. Some elders continued to fear the humans' power. "They are too different from us," they said. "One day they may grow tired of helping. What if they decide to take instead?" These doubts kept the council uneasy, even as the common people began to feel hope. The turning point came when sickness struck. A strange fever spread through one of the villages, burning through families in only a few days. The aliens panicked, fearing it would sweep across the land and finish what hunger had started. But the humans acted quickly. They set up tents, brought out medicine, and worked without rest. They cared for the sick, giving water, food, and treatment. They did not shy away, even when the illness made others afraid to approach. Slowly, the fever broke. Families who had expected to lose, loved ones saw them rise again, weak but alive. Gratitude filled the hearts of the people. Songs were sung not only for the survival of the sick, but for the humans who had stood by them in their darkest hours. For the first time, the people saw them not as terrifying strangers, but as protectors. From then on, things began to change, more quickly. The council invited the humans to share meals, and though the foods were strange to each other, they laughed together at the differences. Children no longer hid behind their parents, but ran to greet the humans. Families began to work alongside them, learning how to build, how to plant crops in healthier soil, how to use the strange tools that seemed almost like magic. The humans never treated them as weak. Instead, they encouraged them to stand, to try, to learn. They did not solve every problem for them, but showed them how to face the challenges together. This, more than anything, began to win the hearts of the aliens. They realized the humans were not here to carry them, but to teach them how to carry themselves again. In the quiet of the night, some still whispered the word Deathworlders, but now it carried a different meaning. It was no longer spoken with fear, but with awe. These were beings who had come from a world of storms, predators, and fire. And yet, they chose not to bring destruction, but strength. The aliens began to see what they had once feared, that the humans were not angels. They were something far more real, far more powerful. They were survivors who had turned their survival into hope for others. And slowly, the fragile people of this world began to believe they could survive too. Time passed, and the alien world began to change in ways no one had imagined. What had once been a land of despair and decay now pulsed with life. Crops began to grow again, rivers ran cleaner, and even the air felt lighter. The humans worked tirelessly, not forcing the aliens to follow, but teaching them how to survive and rebuild. Each day brought small victories: a roof repaired, a field replanted, a sick child smiling once more. Slowly, the people began to realize that their world was not beyond hope. It could be healed, and they themselves could be part of the healing. The council finally gathered to speak openly with the humans. Their elders who had once feared these Deathworlders now felt a quiet respect deep in their hearts. They asked questions about the humans' own world, how they had survived hardships that the aliens could hardly imagine. The humans spoke plainly, telling stories of fierce storms, deadly predators, and unyielding lands. They spoke of struggle after struggle, and how each challenge had made them stronger, faster, smarter. "You survived because you did not give up," one elder said softly, almost to herself. "And yet you came here to help us." The humans nodded. "Strength is meant to be shared," they said simply. "We could not turn away when we saw a world in need." The council realized something profound. Salvation did not always come in gentle forms. It did not always arrive with music or glowing hands. Sometimes, salvation came wrapped in strength, courage, and experience earned through hardship. The humans had lived through a harsh world, and they had survived. Now they brought the tools, knowledge, and will to help another civilization survive as well. As weeks turned into months, the alien people began to follow the humans' example. Children learned to be braver, playing in the fields without fear. Farmers learned to care for the land in ways they had never imagined, guided by human techniques that made soil richer and crops stronger. Builders learned to construct shelters that could withstand storms, teaching their skills to neighbors in return. Slowly, independence grew alongside gratitude. The aliens were no longer waiting passively for salvation. They were learning to stand on their own again, guided by the hands of those who had survived worse. The humans did not rule or force. They encouraged, advised, and acted when needed, but always allowed the aliens to make their own choices. And in that simple act of respect, trust grew. Where fear had once lived, admiration now blossomed. The alien children who had once cowered now ran alongside the humans, laughing, learning, and dreaming. The elders who had worried the humans might one day turn against them now spoke of them with reverence, understanding at last the depth of their courage and kindness. One evening, as the twin suns of the alien world set, the council gathered outside. The humans stood nearby, relaxed but alert, watching the horizon as though it were a place that had always belonged to them. The council looked over their people, now stronger, healthier, and filled with hope. The elders spoke together quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "We called for help," one said. "We expected gentleness, wisdom, even softness, but what came to us was not what we expected." "And yet," another added, "it is exactly what we needed." The people had begun to understand the lesson the humans had quietly taught them. Strength and survival were not enemies of kindness. They were the foundation for it. To thrive, one needed courage and resilience. To help others, one needed experience and determination. The humans had both, and in sharing it, they had given the aliens more than food, medicine, or shelter. They had given them confidence, hope, and the knowledge that they too could endure. Celebrations were held to mark the recovery of the villages. Music filled the night skies, though this time it was a mixture of alien instruments and human laughter, a new harmony born from two worlds meeting. Children danced under the starlight, adults shared stories around fires, and even the humans joined in, learning the customs of the land while teaching a few of their own. For the first time in centuries, the alien world felt united, safe, and alive. The final understanding came quietly, without speeches or ceremony. It was in the way a farmer proudly showed a new crop to a human, who nodded with approval. It was in the way children called out, daring the humans to chase them through fields. It was in the smiles of the elders, who now looked at the humans and saw not monsters, not Deathworlders, but partners, friends, and teachers. They realized that what they had once feared, the power, the strength, the survival instincts of the humans, was exactly what made them the perfect allies. The aliens had called for help, thinking it would arrive in forms they recognized. What arrived was something different, something stronger, something real. And in accepting it, they learned that help did not always come wrapped in the shape we expect. Sometimes it comes in a form that challenges our fear, our imagination, and our understanding, but ultimately brings exactly what is needed to survive and thrive. And so, the alien people stood together, looking at the humans who had come from a harsh world to theirs, and they understood at last. They did not call angels. They did not receive beings of soft light and gentle voice. They received survivors, warriors, and helpers shaped by a death world, and through them, hope had returned. The lesson settled deep in their hearts. When Deathworlders step forward, salvation follows, not as we imagine it, but in the most unexpected and powerful way. The skies above glowed with the last light of the twin suns reflecting off the strong ships that had once seemed frightening, but now felt like guardians. The humans laughed among themselves, talking quietly with the aliens, sharing plans for the future, sharing stories, and sharing wisdom. And the alien world, once fragile and hopeless, finally smiled again, ready to take its place in the universe, stronger than it had ever been, guided by those who had survived worse than anyone could imagine. Hope had returned, not gently, but fiercely, and the aliens would never forget who had brought it.